Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel and this amazing series. I'm Aditya. In this video, we are gonna see concept of stores. So without any further ado, let's begin. Okay, so let's say we have this cards where we have list of products, and when we click a button, we want to show or reflect that we have added item to the cart in, let's say, somewhere in the corner, we have a cart icon, or somewhere, let's say here in the title, that the product is being added, or we just want to reflect the count of that products in our cart. Now the problem here is that these two components, especially this cart component, is totally different from this title component. They are differently placed. So to pass data between them, what we need to do is we need to pass events. As we saw in the last video, we passed the event from card.svelte to cardlist.svelte, which passed in on to app.svelte. And then in our app.svelte, we need to pass that data to the title. So it's kind of like too many things happening here and there. So to avoid this event web or this mesh of events, what we could do is we could have a cleaner approach where we could just have something reflected or something calculated in this card component and have that directly reflected in the any component we want. In this case, this app.swell. So for that, we have a global state management system, which is known as stores. So if you're coming from Vue, you might have worked with Pioneer or Vuex. If you're coming from React, you might have worked with Redux Toolkit or Redux. In the same way, in Svelte, we have Svelte Store. So Svelte Store, depending on what type of store you create, you can have those states or those variables accessed anywhere from your app, or you can have modified them anywhere from your app. So for in this case, we have two types of stores, writable and readable stores. So for writable stores, you can read and write their values anywhere from your app. So in any component, and it will be reflected in, like, the same value will be reflected in wherever you use that store value or read that store value. While in the readable store, you can only read the value in any component, but you only can update or write that value, or you can change the value of that state within the store. Okay, so let me show you an example. So for that, I have already created a store folder here inside src. Inside that, let's create a new store. Let's say cart store.js. Now to this cart store, I'm going to create first a writable store. So we'll see the concept of writable store, and then we will see the concept of readable store. So here, let's just import writable from Svelte Store. Now, to create a writable store, it's very simple. First, we just need to create a variable which we just exported. Let's create export const. Let's say cart, and this is going to be a writable store. Now, this writable function takes two value. First, the initial value of that state, in this case, this cart, and the second one is a callback function, which again takes a parameter of a set function to set the value from the store. So writable store's value could be set from the store as well. Now, one thing here is like the initial value, it could be array, it could be number, it could be string, so it could be of type anything. For simplicity, let's begin with a number. So let's start by putting this as an initial value of 0. So because of course initially our cart value, cart items are going to be 0. Now, inside our cart.svelte, let's bring in that store. So here we are going to say import. So in this case, we have this cart coming from cart store. So we are going to say cart from store cart store.js. And now here I have made a small modification. Previously we had this say hello function. Now I've converted, like I have just added new function add, and I'm just calling this on this button click. So here what we could do is, as we just want to increment the cart count when we add a product, here with each store or each writable store, we get two functions. First is the set function, and the second one is the update function. Now set function, if I do something like this cart.set, this function will take a value, as we have started as a number or have set the initial value of type number. So this will take a new value, let's say we say 10, and then we will have for this car state the new value of 10. But in our case, we want to update the value, because let's say we add a product, the count was 1, then we add another product 2, 3, 4. So we are just updating a value. So in that case, like we are calculating and setting a value, so we are updating a value. So in that case, we need to call card.update. Now this update is going to take a function, which is going to be a updater function. So in this case, we need to pass the old value, in this case n, and we return a new value, which is going to be n plus 1. So whatever was the initial value, we just increment it by 1. Now we are updating the cart store, cart state. Now next thing we need to do is we want to reflect that in this title component. So of course we are going to pass it as a prop over here because we are passing the dynamic content. So here we can pass it as a prop. Now how to get that value? Well, there are two ways to get it. First, again, we import that store. If we want to use this store, or if any component wants to listen for the update for the states of these stores, then they need to subscribe to that store. Okay, so here we are going to use a on mount hook. So why on mount hook? Because whenever this component is mounted, as soon as it is mounted, we want to start listening, or this component should start listen to any updates that happens inside this cart store, especially for this cart state or this cart object. Now here what we are going to do is we will include that on mount hook, which comes from Svelte, and then it's going to take a typical callback where what to do once this function, this component is mounted. Here we want to say cart. Okay, let's do it something like this. So here we are going to take a value, so cart count, which is going to be 0 initially, and then here we are going to say cart dot subscribe. Now this subscribe is going to run a subscriber function. So in this case it's going to be a function again, so it's going to be a value that we will get once, like this is going to be the updated value, and that updated value we want to pass it to cart count. So cart count equal to value, and then simply we can put the value over here, cart count. And now if we go to our app, increment by 1, increment by 1, that's great, everything works fine. Now there are two problems over here. Number one is that we are subscribing to a store. That means we are listening to its changes, but we are not unsubscribing from it, because let's assume that this app.svelte is getting re-rendered many times, or there's like its frequency of getting re-rendered is like it's a lot. So in that case, we need to clean up whatever things are happening here, in this case the subscription, so that we don't have a memory leak problem. So for that, what we could do is we could have an on destroy hook, or we could use the on destroy function where we pass another callback and we say that whenever we subscribe to this store, we just unsubscribe from it. So here I'm going to say let unsubscribe, and that will come over here, unsubscribe, subscribe. And then here, because once you subscribe to a store, you will get an unsubscribe function. So we just need to run that unsubscribe function like this. And then the store will be unsubscribed. This will avoid the memory leak problem. But it introduces second problem, which is kind of like not that important problem, it's just a trivial problem. It adds extra line of code and making our these things, like if you see we are adding extra 4 lines of code, and this kind of make our code bloated or our component bloated. So to avoid that, what we could do is we could use auto subscription of that store. So in this case, we don't need all of these. We don't even need these hooks. What we need to do is whenever we use this cart, we can straight away, or whenever we get that cart store or import that cart store, we can straight away auto subscribe to it by saying $cart. Now Svelte knows that whenever it encounters something like this, it has to, especially if it's related to a store, it has to look for the value of that store. In this case, it will look for this value over here. Now, if we go back again over here, just refresh the page, and if we start it again, everything works fine. So that's great. Now, but what if we have, now in this case, it was just a single value, but what if we have an array? Let's say we were doing something like cart items like this. Then we go back over here, and instead of, now here you will see an error because of course we are incrementing it. We shouldn't increment it, we should add a new item in the cart. So in this case, what we need to do is, like of course cart addition, removal, all these things, it's a bit of a different logic. It's not that straightforward. You just add in the card because of course you need to check the item and then increments its quantity and all those things. But in this case, we will keep it very, very simple. We'll just simply add it in the card to just to demonstrate like what happens when if the store is of type array. So here we just use a spread operator and then we just add a new value. In this case, what was the new value? We are getting the card. So here, let's say we are passing id and card.id, and then inside our app.swell, now here we are using $card. Now if we go back over here, you will see when we add a product, we see it as an like something random string, like or bracket and then object, of course, because it's an object of arrays. So sorry, array of objects. So of course it's going to show something like this. So to avoid that, what we could do is here we can take a reactive statement. So here we could do something like this, card count, and then we could have $card.length, length. Now here if we go back and just put card count, everything will work fine. So if we go back over here, you'll see everything works fine. So this $card, or you can have auto subscription, not in just HTML, you can also use it in JavaScript. All right. Now, what if you want a store whose value you don't want to edit from the components and you only want to edit it through the store itself? Let's say you have a timer. Let's say you are having a deal on your website saying that this deal goes off in 30 days or 20 days, something like that. And you want that timer or the decrement in the timer only to happen in this store and nowhere from the component. Or there could be other scenarios where you want the data only to be updated by the store and nowhere from the component. So in that case, we could make a store as a readable store. So let's create a readable card timer. So const card timer. So readable store has comes from the Svelte Store as well, so we just need to import it. Now this takes two parameters. Number one, the initial value, and the second parameter is going to be the function which runs, and that function takes another parameter which is going to be the setter function. The setter function is just sets the value to that store. So in this case, the initial value will be 0. We want the timer to start from 0 and go from 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now in this case, this function is going to take another parameter which is going to be a function itself, which is going to be this setter function. So this function, this function is a callback that we run to modify value of this, and this function takes some parameter as a function which sets the value for this. Quite confusing, but you'll know what I mean. So now what we need is we will need an interval. So let's say let interval, and this would be of course set interval because every second we are incrementing timer by 1. Now here you could use the date object from JavaScript or that and then, but the problem there is when you use the date object, then you need to modify it or format it, which is possible, which is fine. Or you could use the moment.js to have that timer being run. But let's say we just want to increment it in a very, very plain way, like just using set interval. So in this case, we have this set interval. Now the problem here is when we use set function, we need a new value. We cannot use like update a value and then put a new value. We need directly a new value. That's 1. There we go. Yeah, we don't need that writable store. That's great. Now let's give this a try. So let's import this in our app.swell. So here will be card timer. And then here we could have another component, title, content, timer, and then we can just say card timer. And if we go back over here, okay, I guess I'm doing something wrong. So $card timer, $card timer. We are doing auto subscription. So there we go. And we have 1 interval needs to increment 1. Yes, we just need to count equal to +1, and then we put the count straight away like this, and then we will have the value there, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so on. So that's great. But now there is another problem that we are having a counter, but we don't have a cleanup function to clean whatever we are doing this. Because if we don't have a cleanup function, of course, there are chances of memory leak. So to avoid that, this second parameter, which is a function, it returns another function, which is a cleanup function. So cleanup function is just you clean up your code, or you do not clean up your code actually, but you just clean up the things that you're doing in your code. In this case, we are setting the timer, sorry, setting the interval. So we just clear the interval, clear interval, interval, and that's it. If you go back again, everything works fine. So that's all in this video. In the next video, we will see the concept of Svelte components, which are Svelte head, Svelte body, Svelte this Svelte colon component. So we'll see these special components, and then we will take forward from there. So see you in the next video. Till the next time, goodbye.